Welcome to the Right on Crime podcast. I am your host today, Katie Stahl. I'm the Utah director for Right on Crime, and I'm so excited to have Senator Todd Weiler from the Utah State Legislature joining us today. Welcome, Senator Weiler.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that you have served Davis and Salt Lake counties since 2012 and are a husband and father and attorney, and are also known as a leader in the criminal justice reform space in Utah. So I just want to ask you, what are some of the most important things you have done in the criminal justice reform space in Utah?
Well, thanks. I think I consider the most important work that I've done in that space, or maybe in any space, is I formed a statewide Indigent Defense Commission, or IDC as we call it. When I joined the Utah legislature, Utah was only one of two states, the other was Pennsylvania, that didn't put any state money into public defenders. And as a result of that, we just kind of had a patchwork. It was, back in the 1960s, the state kind of punted that to the counties. And some of our larger counties had done, pretty well with that. And some of our smaller counties had just neglected it. And so if you had an idiot cousin or brother-in-law that got arrested in central or rural Utah, they would expect to spend a total of 7 minutes total with their public defender, who would have met them at the courthouse and told them to plead guilty. And that's basically all we had up until about 7 or 8 years ago.
Wow, that's pretty incredible to think about it when you think in terms of the Constitution and the protections that are afforded there, and the power and the resources of the government. So
yeah,
I can see why that was such a big and important deal to you and to people all across the state. You and I first met a couple of years ago when you were working on the 402 conviction reduction amendments. Do you mind explaining? I feel like that process is probably not well known to a lot of people in the state. Do you mind kind of walking through what that looks like and why you thought the amendments were necessary?
Absolutely. Utah Code Section 76-3-402, so it's Section 402, allows anyone with a criminal conviction to petition the court to reduce the level of their conviction by 1 degree with court approval and by 2 degrees with the approval of both the court and the prosecutor. In order to file the petition, the defendant must have completed probation and paid all restitution. And at that point, the court may reduce if they find that doing so is in the interest of justice. And so it's kind of going to be up to the judge and the circumstances.
Right. So the way it's designed and the way why I was interested in supporting it is it's not a mandate. It's not something that automatically happens. There's still court discretion involved, and it's kind of providing an opportunity to move on once someone has fully paid their debt to society.
Yeah, and that's the whole purpose, by allowing individuals an opportunity to reduce the degree of their conviction. It creates an incentive for them to pay their restitution and to make their victims whole. It also incentivizes that person to successfully complete their probation, including the rehabilitative components such as substance abuse or mental health treatment. And these are shown to reduce recidivism and set people up for a more successful community integration. And reducing a criminal conviction particularly from a felony to a misdemeanor. So in Utah, it'd be a third-degree felony down to a Class A misdemeanor. That can remove barriers to education, housing, and employment for some of those defendants.
Right. I know in research that I've looked at, Utah, we're coming in with a batting average over 60% on our recidivism rates, and it's a pretty ugly number. And also, when looking at how we treat people who have been incarcerated, obviously there are different levels, right? Some people need a lot of supervision, but what nationally and in Utah, what data has shown is that the longer someone is on parole doesn't necessarily improve outcomes, but what does is gainful employment. In
Yeah.
fact, that's often a number one predictor of someone going back into the system, is whether or not they're able to find a job where they feel like they can actually support themselves.
I was just speaking to a group a couple of days ago, and I kind of joked that our governors in Utah, they love to brag about everything we're number one at. We've been voted the best managed state for almost a decade in a row, and there's a lot of things that Utah does right. I said one of the things that we're not really good at is recidivism, and we're trying to change that. We're trying to turn that around. So that's something where we have lots of room for improvement.
Yeah, I know one of the initiatives that we've been talking about for next session is prosecutor initiated resentencing, where Utah has indeterminate sentencing. And
Yes.
so, yeah, that's a system I feel like that is different to conceptually for probably many folks. But what prosecutor initiated resentencing would allow for is, in certain circumstances, it's a when and an if, not a mandate, but it would allow for a prosecutor to bring up a case where he or she felt that there had been extraordinary circumstances, either in a change in behavior in someone who was incarcerated, or the laws had changed for sentences, things like that. But why Right on Crime was initially interested in this concept is because what we're seeing with it across the country, I mean, there've only been roughly 1,000 cases, but it's near 0% recidivism. And there's something about the person who put you in jail having the thought to say, hey, maybe this person deserves a second chance. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the prosecutor initiated resentencing, or PIR, is a form of a second look legislation that enables prosecutors to revisit old cases and propose a revised sentence to the court. It gives prosecutors an extra tool in the toolbox to provide redress for people where confinement is no longer in the interest of justice, or where an individual has done a great job of rehabilitating themselves. While there are some costs associated, I'm sorry, while there are some costs for the prosecutor's office to review cases and file these motions, the program ultimately can save money, saving taxpayers potentially thousands of dollars due to the cost of unnecessary incarceration, which in Utah costs about $40,000 per year. And of course, that incarcerated person, they're not working to pay their rent, their mortgage, their kids, school, lunch, or other bills, and they're not supporting their families. They're not paying taxes because they're just sitting, in their jail cell. And lengthy incarceration can actually increase an individual's risk to reoffend. So I think we should be thoughtful about when and if a lengthy incarceration should apply. A lot of studies have found that if you throw someone in jail for like a weekend, sometimes you'll get more of a bang for the buck than you will if you throw them in jail for a month or even a year, because it kind of gives them some time to kind of like rethink their priorities and think about what they did to land them there. But if they're in jail for too long, they kind of just hunker down and they kind of just accept this victim mentality.
Yes. And I think that's what exactly what Right on Crime believes as well, is that being tough on crime means having less of it. And so looking at policies that are based on data that show us where we can make improvements to really make it so people are less likely to reoffend. What do you see as the current criminal justice landscape in Utah? Is there anything you're excited about? Anything that worries you?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been some pushback on our clean slate expungements, and so I think we kind of overwhelmed our the people that do the background checks in Utah. So we're kind of giving them a breather, but I hope we can get back into that. I believe that people deserve a second chance in life, especially if somebody, maybe embarked on a criminal lifestyle, in their early 20s or their late teenage years. A lot of people will grow out of that and actually, get maturity, their brains finish developing and all of that, and they can become productive citizens. And kind of the old school model was, well, you made a mistake when you were 22. Well, we're going to punish you for that until you're 90. And I just don't think that is in the best interest of our communities.
Anything coming up in the 2025 legislative session that you're looking at so
It's
far?
interesting that you should ask that. Today is the primary election day in Utah, so a
Right.
lot of us, including myself, are more focused on getting reelected than we are on the 2025 legislation. But I'm sure we'll have some interesting criminal justice issues to talk about. And we did have an interim meeting. I'm sorry, just last week. We usually meet the third Wednesdays of each month, where we talked about a few issues, including whether civil judgments should be able to be renewed for more than 16 years. But we've got a couple things coming up on our. I chair the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Committee in the Senate, and I co-chair the interim committee with my House sponsor. And so we're going to have some interesting items on our agendas in August and September and October coming up. But I don't know yet what the 2025 session will bring, and I'm hoping to be there. I'm running for re-election, but time will tell.
Well, we look forward to seeing what's ahead. And thank you so much, Senator Weiler. It looks like we're out of time, but I just wanted to thank you for joining us today for the Right on Crime podcast. To reach anyone on our team or to learn more about Right on Crime, please visit rightoncrime.com. And again, Senator Weiler, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.